There's just not enough time. As a gardener, there's never enough time in the day to do all that I need to, let alone all that I want to. I know I'm not alone, and many of you feel this crunch too. Since I started this channel, I've always strived to jam as much information as possible into each and every video. What I've noticed though is that some garden questions are best answered in a shorter, more narrowed approach. Address the problems in a hyper-focused, in-depth, but concise format that growers on the go like you and I can digest, learn from, and then implement. Thus enter the Garden Quickie. In these highly specific videos, we can get to the heat of the question without any of that outside noise. I've assembled a compilation of the first 10 Garden Quickie videos for you here today. I've also included links in the description to each and every one of the videos. In this fast-paced world of ever-shrinking free time, hopefully these are just what your garden ordered. Enjoy. Hey everyone, welcome to the very first ever Garden Quickie. It's the show where we tackle the most pressing garden issues of the day in 2 minutes or less. I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms, and today we're talking garlic scapes. Garlic growers in the northern United States and Canada will notice in late spring and early summer a thicker, robust, tall stalk growing right out of the center of the plant. Don't be alarmed, that right there is what we call the garlic scape. It's actually the flowering stem and bud of hardneck garlic. And as cool as it is, it's actually a massive drain on the garlic plant. And if you're like me and you really only want big garlic bulbs, then they must be pruned off. You want to wait until they grow taller than the rest of the plant and start to curl. Cut them down to as far as you can go without damaging the rest of the foliage, and that's it. Your garlic plant will now get the clues to forget about flowering and put all of their energy back into the bulb production. Fantastic. That's just what we want. But what happens to all those garlic scapes that we collected? Don't throw them away, they're delicious. Literally tons of mouth-watering recipes exist for cooking garlic scapes online, and being a highly seasonal delicacy, seeing them available at the store for more than a week or two is quite rare. So don't just toss them aside, toss them into a frying pan instead. Garlic is amazing. One of those rare plants where we get 2 delicious crops for the price of 1. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. There's two types of tomatoes based on their growth. Both need support, but in different ways. I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to the next episode of the Garden Quickie, where in 2 minutes or less, we tackle your garden's most pressing issues. In today's episode, we're talking tomato support. And like we mentioned, there's 2 different kinds of tomatoes that you're going to be growing. Determinate, or bush type, and indeterminate, or the vine type. And all but the smallest varieties of the determinate tomatoes need support. Tomatoes are dense and they weigh a lot. And even the most compact kinds of tomato plants can become top heavy and fall over with the extra weight of the fruit. Staking, tying, or trellising your tomato plant has 3 main benefits. First, it gets them off the ground and takes away that invitation to pests, rot, and disease. It also allows for ease of maintenance for pruning, watering, and of course the harvest. And finally, it most definitely saves space by training the plants upwards, so you can plant more tomatoes in a given area. To stake our tomatoes, we're going to need 2 things, a vertical structure and a fastener. Vertical structures can be anything from a vine up above, an intricate fence or trellis, or simply a stake in the ground. Your fasteners can be anything from store-bought tomato clips to the free twist ties you get at the grocery store. Avoid fasteners such as bare wire, fishing line, and even low-weight thread, as those things can cut into the stem and destroy the plant. Tomatoes, like most plants, have nodes. These are the sections of the stem between the branches. You can tie up your tomatoes on every node or every second node. It's really your preference. Try not to tie off your tomato plants directly below a branch. Rather, aim for directly above. Fastening directly below a branch can actually cause the main stem to break if the wind, weight, and conditions hit just right. As your tomato plants grow, keep an eye on those upper nodes. Tie them off as need be, supporting your crops along their growing journey. Happy staking, guys. Green onions. There's a million ways to grow them, but one of the easiest ways to get a lot of green onions fast is to grow them from seed. Did you know that you can skip buying green onion seeds at the store every spring and just harvest them from your own garden? It's not at all hard. Let me show you how. I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, where we tackle your garden's most pressing issues in 2 minutes or less. And today, we're focusing on the green onion seeds. More specifically, how to grow, flower, and harvest your own seeds, giving you one more path to unlimited green onions. Green onions, also known as scallions, are a mild allium variant grown for their delicious green stalks. Because they're a relatively fast grower, and we only harvest the foliage rather than a resource-expensive fruiting body, they are an ideal candidate for growing from seed. However, even though they're really easy to grow and they readily go to flower for us, green onions are still a biennial crop, meaning they only seed in their second year. So if you're planning on harvesting a bunch of green onion seeds for sale or for future crops, plan on doing so a year in advance. Okay, timing aside, green onions will readily flower in their second year. They do this by sending up a huge flower stalk around mid-spring. All alliums have what we call perfect flowers, meaning they have both male parts, or stamens, and female parts, or pistils. However, these guys cannot self-pollinate. Because of this, multiple flowering stalks are usually necessary, as are pollinating insects, such as bees. And further to that, it is advisable to grow your green onions outdoors in the spring and summer. These are the things that are going to contribute to the most viable seed. Once pollinated, the flower stalks will slowly turn brown over the course of early summer. Leave them on the plant as long as possible. Onion seeds are heavy, and they won't fly away in the wind, so don't worry about that. Once the flower head really turns brown and dries out, you can see the black seeds formed in their own little individual packets. Now you can go ahead and collect the heads from the mother plant. Shake the seeds into an envelope, deli cup, or similar container and store in a cool, dry place. I've had green onion seeds germinate at least 6 years after harvesting, so the seeds can last a fair amount of time. You're going to end up with a lot of them, so pass the seeds along to a family member or someone that's just getting into gardening. Green onions are a great first-time crop for beginners, and you'll have more than enough to share. There's 2 ways that I like to harvest lettuce, each with its own set of advantages depending on the situation. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Garden Quickie, where in 2 minutes or less, we tackle the most important gardening questions of the day. And today, we're talking about how to harvest your lettuce. It's literally my favorite time in the garden, and that's harvest time. Finally, after a long cold spring, this upright heirloom romaine is ripe for the picking. Great, but how to harvest it? Well, that all depends. There's 2 ways to harvest, the cut and come again method and the all at once method. Let's cover the cut and come again method first. With this method, it's pretty self-explanatory. We're harvesting the outside older leaves of the plant only. We do this in the hopes to keep the plant alive and producing so that we may come back again and again and harvest some more. Sounds great, and it really is, most of the time. Provided the conditions and the variety of lettuce are right, we can keep revisiting the partially harvested plant time and time again, up to a point. The second method is where we simply cut down the lettuce right at the root collar or just below and harvest the whole plant all at once. This is the method that we'd choose if we were pulling lettuce for a market, or maybe the variety didn't support multiple harvests, like icebergs, or we just simply needed it all and cutting off a few leaves wasn't going to be enough. But then, under normal circumstances, why would we ever choose not to multi-harvest? Well, Even if they can harvest over and over, a lettuce's life is finite. Some varieties last longer than others, and some seasons, well, it simply doesn't work to multi-harvest. Right now, entering the heat of summer, lettuce will begin to bolt or flower, no matter what we do. To maximize the harvest, it's sometimes wise to cut it all down at once and live to plant another day when the weather is cooler. So, next time you're gearing up to cut down that lettuce, take a second to think which method best fits this particular harvest. Zucchini, the powerhouse squash that produces bounty by the bucket loads. But what if we were to grow them in buckets? Is that even possible? Well, it is. Container zucchini is most definitely a reality, and it's not that hard. I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms, and welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, where in 2 minutes or less, we tackle the most pressing issues of your garden. And today we're talking how to grow container zucchini. In this episode, there's 3 things that we have to cover: soil, pot size, and the actual planting. You can grow your container zucchinis right from seed, but I always do mine from starter plants. You can do them from starter plants that you've made yourself or ones that you buy at the store. It's just a much easier process doing from a well-started zucchini plant than it is trying to do it directly from seed. Before we get going with the planting, let's look at what we need to start. Zucchini enjoy a rich, organic-filled, well-drained soil that's slightly acidic. Most commercial potting mixes will do great in this regard. Conversely, you can also make your own DIY potting mix, and I'll throw a link in the description if that's something you're interested in. For pots, it's all about the size. You can use grow bags, baskets, buckets, standard pots, just about anything that can hold soil but drain water. Fill your pot or container all the way to the top with the soil mix and make a depression in the center as deep as the zucchini plant is from the bottom of its pot right up to the first whorl of leaves. Place the plant in the middle and backfill. And done. Well, sort of. Mulch a nice thick 1-inch layer of straw, leaves, or grass clippings. Bare soil evaporates water fast and heats up as the summer progresses. You don't want to have to water these guys daily, as any nutrients that you've built up in the soil will simply be washed away. And speaking of watering, quite literally the easiest way to water zucchinis that you're growing in containers is from the bottom. Let the soil in that pot soak up as much water as it can possibly hold. Then put your zucchini in your favorite sunny location. These plants are going to need a minimum of 6 hours of direct sun every day, more if you can give it. As the summer progresses and your zucchini plant starts to grow bigger and bigger, quite likely you're going to need to add nutrients to the pot. Remember, growing in pots or containers is a closed system. Once the zucchini plant uses up all the nutrients in this soil, it's got nowhere else to go for food. Make sure to fertilize with an all-around organic blend, not super high in nitrogen. Fairly soon after planting, watch for the flowers. There's 2 kinds, male and female. It's the female flowers that produce the fruit. For such a large plant to be able to be grown in pots and containers is really quite amazing. But they can, and they do surprisingly well, which is great news for patio growers and gardeners like me who always seem to be short on space. Whew. When summer hits, it can hit fast. In less than 2 minutes, your zucchini can go from this to this. Know what else can happen in 2 minutes or less? Garden Quickies, where we aim to tackle the most pressing gardening issues of the day. And today, it's all about watering. There's 5 key watering tips that I wanted to share with you today. We got less than 2 minutes, so let's get going. Watering tip number 1, and it's a biggie, and it's the time of day that you water. In the heat of summer, the best times of day to water, in order of preference, is morning, afternoon, and then evening. Watering your plants in the morning sets them up to tackle the heat of the day and is by far the best option. Watering in the afternoon, during that midday heat, can alleviate some stress, definitely, but it's wasteful due to evaporation. You'll lose more water than the plants can take up. And watering at night can have the effect of keeping the foliage damp when you don't really want it to be, and crops like tomatoes and zucchinis can start to develop leaf problems and even disease. If you have the option, always water in the morning. And to expand on that, looking at this zucchini here, tip number 2, don't water the leaves. Like we said, it can invite disease, and really the plant's roots are the workhorse of water uptake. Let them do their job. Try to water your plants at the base rather than from up top. It's more efficient and it's better for the plants. At number 3, we have length of watering. Longer is always better. Short, frequent waterings tend to grow plants with short, shallow root systems. And plants with shallow root systems are far more susceptible to drought and heat issues. Water more thoroughly, but less frequently for healthier, more resilient crops. Here's a neat trick for you container growers. Water from below. Have you ever noticed how much water pours out the bottom when you water your pots and containers from above? Hint, it's 50% or more sometimes. Not only is that a huge waste of water, it's also messy. And on top of that, how much nutrients are lost in the process? Let your plants soak up as much water as they can for 4 to 5 hours, and the chores of watering your pots every day are a thing of the past. And finally, the last watering tip is not a watering technique at all. It's to mulch. Make sure the top of your soil is covered with a thick layer of mulch at all times. It'll mitigate extreme heat and of course evaporation. Have a look at this corn bed here that I watered nearly a week ago. For the last 5 days, we've had extreme heat up over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet the soil below is as moist as anything. You gotta mulch. It's the best thing you can do for your plants. Well, other than watching more episodes of the Garden Quickie, of course. Tomato pruning. This isn't one of those necessary chores like watering or mulching. Your plants can and will grow just fine without it. But if you're growing indeterminate or vine-type tomatoes, most certainly your plants, and thus the harvest, can benefit from some managed pruning. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms, and welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, where in 2 minutes or less, we tackle your garden's most pressing issues. And today, it's all about pruning your tomatoes. Before we get started, let's touch on the 4 main reasons of why you'd want to prune your tomatoes in the first place. First up, it keeps the plants manageable. Indeterminate tomatoes know no bounds and will continue to grow forever if left unchecked. Second, you can maximize production by focusing on fruit development instead of ungodly amounts of foliage. Third, it improves air circulation to minimize pest and disease outbreaks. And finally, pruning your tomatoes allows them to shed unwanted lower leaves and stems that are simply a drain on the plants. And they can also be a conduit for pests and fungal outbreaks. Okay, we've made the leap to do it, so let's get to pruning. When managing our indeterminate tomatoes, there's 2 types of pruning: removing the suckers and stem or foliar management. Let's focus on the suckers first because that's the easiest. Suckers are the easily identified 45-degree shoots that spring out of a stem axil. That is, where a side shoot meets the main trunk. Suckers are hyper-vigorous shoots that are almost tomato plants unto themselves. Left alone, and they'll just become main stems and will actually produce fruit pretty readily. Great stuff, but a single tomato plant can only do so much. And too many suckers left to run wild will be a massive drain on the plant, and most won't produce before the season comes to an end, ironically leaving you with less of a tomato harvest overall. Pruning them is easy. No tools required. Just pinch off the little shoots with your fingers. They pop off surprisingly easy when they're young. As for how many to prune, I prune all the suckers up to the first branch of the plant with flower clusters. If you do this when flowering starts, you should only need to do this maybe once or twice a year. The second type of pruning is removing old or sick or really low branches. We do this to keep the airflow nice and high and the plant health at a premium. Using clean clippers, snip off any leaves that are touching the ground, and if you have to, remove entire branches. Don't go too crazy with this type of pruning, however. The plant does need foliage to protect the fruit from the ever-increasing heat of the summer sun. Usually, if you just focus on removing the leaves that are touching the ground, you know, those really low ones, and any obvious sick or dying leaves, you'll be just fine. Hey, happy pruning, guys, and all the best with your tomatoes this year. One of the most important factors governing the success of our crops is spacing. Just like this sweet corn behind me here, the space between your plants and rows has a huge effect on your plant's health and productivity. However, corn is a bit of a unique one, in that spacing governs not only growth and health, but also pollination and crop viability. It's the fine line between having enough space for these large, vigorous plants to grow, but also being close enough to get adequate pollination for the ears to develop. Welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, where in 2 minutes or less, we tackle the most pressing garden questions of the day. And today, we're talking corn spacing. A little less than 3 weeks ago, we seeded this 8-foot bed with Golden Bantam sweet corn. I sowed the seeds at a spacing of 4 to 6 inches. It worked out great, and nearly all the seeds sprouted. But much like carrots or beets, we've sown far more than we need. About double, in fact. Corn should be spaced about 10 to 12 inches apart from each other. Closer than that, and the plants begin to compete with each other for water and nutrients. And for a big, vigorous plant like corn, that's not going to end well. But any further apart, and the corn won't receive adequate pollination. You see, corn is entirely anemophilous, or wind pollinated. So it requires other corn plants in a specific density of spacing to get max pollination, and thus max harvest. It's best to thin when the plants are about 4 inches tall and have 3 to 4 blades. Don't pull them out, simply cut them off right at the root collar. These plants here are a little bit large, and I definitely want to thin them at a much younger age, at least a week or so ago. Either way, if you seeded at a 6-inch spacing, simply cut down every second plant right at the root collar like we mentioned. Now, the root collar is where the stem meets the soil. Easy stuff, that's it. Shouldn't take you long, and your corn will be well on its way to an epic harvest later this summer. Know what else doesn't take that long? Garden Quickies. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and you'll consider checking out the next one. Weeds. No matter how long you've been gardening, weeds are inevitable. I agree, they can be a nuisance some of the time, but really, they're not the big bad enemy that they're made out to be. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms, and welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, where in 2 minutes or less, we tackle your garden's most pressing issues. And today, it's all about weeds. In my world, weeds are an indicator of a healthy, supportive soil. You see, weeds are simply a crop that I didn't plant. You see, for the last 10 years, I've been using weeds to boost my garden for amazing yields. I do it in 5 different ways, and there's only about 90 seconds left, so we better get to it. The first way that I use weeds, such as these dandelions here, is as a dormant bed cover crop. Weeds protect your garden's most precious resource by eliminating erosion, moderating temperature swings, and keeping the soil bioactive. And for little to no effort on our part. The second way that I use weeds in my garden is to chop and drop. Which is basically just like it sounds. Simply cut the weeds down and mulch them in place. The foliage then returns valuable nutrients and organic matter back to your soil, which is perfect to facilitate the next crop. The next way that I use weeds is very similar in that I just chop them up and use them as a mulch around the garden. Green mulches like weeds can boost your plants to unreal yields. And being free, the price is just right. If it's the end of the season and you no longer have any plants around that you need to mulch, simply put the weeds and all their leaves into your compost to help boost future soils and future amending. Composts aren't just for kitchen scraps anymore. Weed foliage is full of amazing micronutrients and trace elements for you to make the best future soils with. On top of that, weeds break down super fast, and being a green, they can actually speed up your compost. Last but not least, The final way that I use weeds in my garden is to make a weed tea fertilizer. A while back, I did a whole video on the process, but essentially what it is you just ferment the weeds in a bucket of water for around 6 weeks or longer if you have the patience, strain it, and then use the liquid solution like you would any organic liquid fertilizer. You see, weeds by their very nature can pull more nutrients out of the ground than most plants. And that makes the resulting tea concoction probably the most complete, amazing feeding boost that you could ever give your plants. Truly. The other bonus of weed teas, unlike a lot of the other methods, is that you can store this stuff for a couple years. So even if you don't have an immediate use for it, store it and use it on future gardens. I hope that by using weeds in these 5 ways, the next time you see a dandelion or a clover or even a buttercup, you'll look at it in a different, more positive way. Potatoes. Amazing plants that grow more potatoes out of the root nodules just below the soil surface. The single most famous root crop has another distinction in that more potato plants can be grown from the potatoes themselves, thus creating an infinite cycle of bounty. Hi, I'm Jeff from the Ripe Tomato Farms, and welcome to another episode of the Garden Quickie, where in 2 minutes or less, we address the most asked garden questions of the day. And today, it's all about sprouting or chitting your potatoes. During select times of the year, you can buy seed potatoes for planting. But did you know that likely you already have all you need to get started right at home? That's right. You can create infinite potato yields by simply using your grocery store potatoes. I start this process about a month before I want to be planting my potatoes out in the garden. Baby potatoes can be harvested in as little as 60 to 70 days, so you can do this several times a year, up to 2 months before your first fall frost. Getting your potatoes to sprout and to a plantable state is a 3-step process, but it's much easier than people realize. Think about it. How many of us have done it purely by accident? First, rinse off your potatoes in cold water. Many store-bought spuds are sprayed with growth inhibitors, to prevent them from sprouting during transport and storage. So you want to try and wash that stuff off. As a bonus, the moisture may also help to trigger sprouting. Second, place the potatoes in a shallow dish or deli cup, or even a box, in a cool, dark place for a couple of weeks. It's at this time that the potato eyes emerge or become more pronounced. Now, potato eyes are the dormant stem buds from which new plants are going to form. And note, a single potato plant can have many, many viable eyes, so you don't need to chit a bunch of them to get enough potato plants. Lastly, once you can see that the eyes are starting to form and are really noticeable, pull the potatoes out into some light at least 6 to 8 hours a day and watch them sprout. At this point, if your soil temperatures are above 40, 45 degrees Fahrenheit, you can go ahead and plant them in the ground. You want to cut off sections of the tuber that is sprouted rather than planting the whole thing with multiple sprouts. Remember, you got to observe proper potato spacing. If it's too cold out or the space isn't ready yet, you can do what I do and create little potato starter plants, giving you more time to plant out your potatoes in the garden at your leisure. Good stuff. Thanks for watching, guys. And hey, if garden quickies are your thing, be sure to click on this playlist here as we explore and solve more growing issues in 2 minutes or less.